I think every conductor you talk to will have a different answer to the question of how do you create a great program. It's very individual, but I think there's a real art to it. For me, a great program has a thread running throughout, some kind of message. I guess for me, a great program is like a great story. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a moral to the story. So something that you can take away. And that can come in many forms. That can be an abstract takeaway. It can be a very specific takeaway thematically. So, for example, what I try to do is I try to create programs that have great variety, but are interconnected in some way. And the connection may not be that obvious. It could be that the composers were thinking about some related theme, or perhaps the era that the pieces were written in was similar, or the conditions under which the composers wrote the pieces were similar, or maybe the sound worlds are similar. So for me, great programs have some connection, but also give the listener great variety. Well, of course, especially in this day and age, we have to balance this idea of a program that's going to sell, and often programs sell based on repertoire, so there's a limited number of pieces that people will recognize and will buy tickets for a concert. But one doesn't want to be limited to 20, 30 pieces in the repertoire, if there are even that many that are guaranteed sells. So it's a matter of trying to find repertoire that will appeal, that has some name recognition, but also combining that with repertoire that will also be a little bit newer for the orchestra, so that you try to outrun the fatigue factor of playing the same pieces over and over again, while also appealing to the audience. So I'd say programming is a very delicate and complicated juggling act, where you're trying to balance all of these different components. And then, of course, you have the soloist, which soloist I want, what repertoire they can play, whether we've programmed it recently or not. So all of these things have to come into play when creating a program. I start by putting out all of the major pieces that I want to do in a season, and probably 2 or 3 times as many as I really need. And then I look at them and I try to see if there's any connecting DNA among those pieces. And then I start pairing those pieces. You know, if it's a piece that's very well known, then I start to look at pairing it with something that's less well known, maybe more contemporary. I am a huge advocate and champion of contemporary music and living composers, so I like to weave that thread, which also can be somewhat dangerous for audiences in terms of sales. So you have to be very careful about how to do that. This program for Carnegie Hall is extraordinarily eclectic in terms of programs, but I think one of the great things about Spring for Music Festival is that this is a festival that looks not only at the tried and true in terms of repertoire, in terms of orchestras. You know, it enables us to do the unexpected, and that's the mandate of Spring for Music. So I had a different, what would I call it? Let's see. When I was creating the program for Spring for Music, I didn't feel the same kind of restrictions that I normally feel, because the mandate is create a program that's unusual and that you wouldn't normally have the opportunity to create. So given that caveat, I created a program that really brings together a lot of disparate elements. John Adams is one of my dearest friends, and he's a composer whose music I believe in, you know, with every iota of my being. And this is a piece. We're going to open our program with a piece of John Adams. We're going to open our program with one of John Adams's pieces, but a piece that's not played that often. It's a piece for strings only called Shaker Loops. And it's a real tour de force for the string section of any orchestra, and Baltimore Symphony has a particularly wonderful string section. They're virtuosic, they're daring, they're passionate, they're rhythmically driven, and they have all these elements that don't often get featured. So not only am I featuring a piece by a composer that I love, but also I'm featuring a section of the orchestra that deserves to be in the spotlight, although every section deserves to be in the spotlight with the Baltimore Symphony. And then I'm following that with a concerto for an unusual grouping. It's a concerto written specifically for a group called Time for Three. These are three young men that I met first in Philadelphia. They played for me when I was guest conducting Philadelphia Orchestra years ago. They said, you know, we're doing this crossover thing. We love jazz, we love to improvise, and we've got this group. And I thought, at that time, these guys are great, spectacular. They're very engaging, very charismatic, and they play wonderfully. And they've had several concerti written for them with orchestra, and this one is written by another favorite composer of mine, Jennifer Higdon, who lives in Philadelphia and often comes to Baltimore. So, and she recently, I should say that she recently won the Pulitzer Prize, so you can't go too wrong with that. And Jennifer's a great supporter of mine, great supporter of the Baltimore Symphony, and a very personable composer to attend events. So the whole first half is by living composers, which is highly unusual to be able to have the luxury of featuring two living composers, one male, one female, no less. And then the second half is even more unusual in a way, because we're going to perform Prokofiev's Fourth Symphony, which is a symphony that I actually have never heard performed live except when I've done it. So it's a very rarely performed piece. I would say for Prokofiev, though, aside from his Fifth Symphony and his First Symphony, the other symphonies just aren't programmed that frequently because they don't have that audience recognition and that draw. But programming, again, for Spring for Music allows us this incredible freedom and artistic largesse, in a way, to be able to program pieces that we don't normally have the opportunity to play. So we're absolutely thrilled about it.